Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post. I'm your host, Ghadi Francis, coming to you from the heart of Beirut, Lebanon. And this is our weekly show where we bring you all things new West Asia. This week has been really big for the region. Landmark announcements, anniversaries, and something big brewing between the US and Iran. We will dive into all this, but first, let's take a quick look at what's making the headlines.
2 Syrian soldiers killed and 6 wounded after Israel launches an airstrike on the west coast. Official media named Israel behind the attack, said it targeted air defense sites in Tartus. Observers say a Hezbollah weapons depot was among the targets. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to meet US President Joe Biden on his trip to America next week. He will be speaking at the UNGA and meeting world leaders on the sidelines. Saudi Arabia said it is hosting a delegation of Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels for talks on ending the civil war. This is the Houthi leader's first public visit to Riyadh since 2015. The US and Bahrain signed strategic and economic agreement to expand defense and intelligence collaboration. Agreement signed at the meeting between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa.
It is the largest and the longest protests that Israel has ever witnessed. For 9 months now, every week, people are descending to the streets. This week also, a protest took place, but something big happened alongside. The Israeli Supreme Court has opened an inquiry about the judicial reforms. Now, what happened in the first hearing and what's to follow? Here's a report.
And counting. It is officially the biggest protest Israel has ever seen. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government's push for judicial reform has sparked a crisis in Israel, one that now threatens the very order in the country. While build-up on the streets continues, President Isaac Herzog has ignited a ray of hope in many minds. The president says the ruling government has proposed reforms acceptable to the opposition and the administration.
I would like to share with you that the parties have a proposal that is the basis for immediate understandings which will preserve the state of Israel as a stable democracy in the spirit of the values of the Declaration of Independence.
Details of the new proposal are not out yet, but one thing is certain: it only needs the final approval before unveiled, and that it is in all possibility the only thing that can end the unrest tormenting Israel. This week, the Israeli top court began its hearing into the judicial reforms. The arguments revolve around the first aspect of the reform, a new law that aims to curtail the apex court's powers. It strips the judiciary of its power to nullify government actions it deems unreasonable. A 15-member full bench presided over the first round of hearing. It went on for 12 hours, nothing short of a marathon. A live broadcast for the country that showed Israel's top judges spar with government lawyers.
Surely, sir, you believe that the duty to act reasonably, which is a duty that applies to every administrative authority, also applies to the government and its ministers, right? So who is going to supervise that they act reasonably?
Our position in the end is that the petitions are not ripe for hearing, and the hearing should be held in the future if the appropriate factual and legal infrastructure is formed.
Why is there a need for a legal procedure or a ruling that will harm the soul of a democracy?
Israel has no set constitution. There are rather a set of rules to abide by. At the heart of the action is the reasonableness standard. It is a broad doctrine, what critics call blunt. An instrument that the court has used to block cronyism and protect human rights. It has on many occasions been used to encourage what the court calls rational decision-making. It has other tools, but this is seen as the most significant one. The government advocates that the reasonableness standard gives unprecedented power to the judiciary. Netanyahu's allies say that judicial reform is needed to rebalance powers between the branches of the government. But it's prompted a crisis in Israel's defense forces, reservists, and some soldiers vowing not to serve. The Israeli shekel weakening, as well as concern from Israel's greatest allies.
We are here today to protest in front of the Supreme Court because we are for the judicial reform. We want to balance the Supreme Court. The activism of the judicial system in Israel is terrible. It's not a democracy. 15 judges in Israel decide on more of the politicians and more over the people. This is not a democracy.
I feel sad. I feel sad for several months already because I grew up in a democracy. I went to the army at the age of 18, defending a democracy. This is my basic state of mind. I cannot see myself living a different social structure. And now I feel that Israeli democracy is in peril. Israeli democracy is under threat. And I'm sad.
The verdict will most likely be announced next year. And once that happens, there will be a few possibilities. It may send the law back to the Knesset for changes. They can accept the reform, or worst, they can deem it unconstitutional, pushing the country into a deeper crisis. When Netanyahu introduced the reform last year, he promised he would be in control. But it has been anything but a bumpy ride for the country ever since.
Something really big is brewing between the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now this week, a prisoner swap was officially announced. And in this process, Washington will be now unfreezing $6 billion in Iranian funds. This has started an uproar in the Senate, and observer circles are reading into it. Some or many are speculating that this might pave way to a renewal in the nuke talks that were really long stalled. Now, we have been tracking this in the West Asia Post for years now. And in this report, we will bring you all the details.
Something big is brewing in West Asia. After months of closed-door negotiation, the region might soon witness a rare moment of cooperation. America and Iran will soon carry out a carefully choreographed prisoner swap. All conditions have been met. Under the arrangement, Tehran will be granted access to the roughly $6 billion in Iranian oil revenues. They were previously blocked in South Korean banks because of US sanctions. Now, after a year of indirect negotiations, the Biden administration has issued a waiver to allow banks to transfer $6 billion in frozen Iranian funds to Qatar. It will be regulated by the Qatari Central Bank. The State Department will be closely watching all transactions. Washington says Iran can use the money only for humanitarian purposes, specifically food and medicine. But Tehran is of another mind. This week, speaking exclusively to an American broadcaster, the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said that their government will spend the money on anything it deems important. This invoked a reaction from Washington.
If Iran tries to divert the funds, we'll take action and we'll lock them up again. I also want to be clear. This is not a payment of any kind. It's not ransom. These aren't U.S. taxpayer dollars. And we haven't lifted a single one of our sanctions on Iran. Iran will be getting no sanctions relief.
The unfreezing of funds has not been well accepted by many lawmakers. Critics of the deal argue that by giving Iran access to the blocked funds, the Biden administration is allowing Tehran to free up other money, adding that this free money could be used to buy weapons or even back proxies in the region. The Biden administration announced the deal to the Senate this week. They justified the Republican accusations of paying the mullahs and said that they will do anything to bring the innocent Americans back home. The broad outlines of the US-Iran deal were made public in August. Under this, 5 American citizens detained by Iran would be allowed to leave. Among those detailed in Iran are US-Iran dual nationals environmentalist Morad Tehbaz and businessman Siamak Namazi. As of now, they have been shifted from high-security prisons to house arrest. Not revealing their identities, Tehran said all 5 detainees are in good health. 5 Iranians held by America will also be released. Prisoners from both sides will transit through Qatar. The release of prisoners from both sides is expected to help with restarting the nuclear talks. The issue has remained a bone of contention for some time now. Observers in the region have welcomed the swap. Not being too optimistic, they say it can be the start of something new. But what will that be? We'll know soon.
West Asia shined big in the G20. The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was in New Delhi. MBS, alongside the UAE's top diplomat, launched a project. It is a corridor from India to the Middle East to Europe. Now, this is aiming to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. What does this mean? What is the difference between the two projects? We tell you.
Last week was big for West Asia. Leaders of Saudi Arabia and Turkey were in New Delhi to take part in the G20 summit. While the meeting in itself made headlines, there was a mega announcement on the sidelines with special focus on West Asia. Narendra Modi, Joe Biden, Mohammed bin Salman and Ursula von der Leyen were seated on the same table when they announced the launch of the India-Middle East-Europe corridor. The project aims to improve connectivity across the 3 regions. The IMEC will connect West Asia to India and Europe via rail and port links. US President Joe Biden has called it a big deal. The Americans are counting on it to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative, but the other members of this developing corridor believe otherwise.
This is an initiative of very important countries who all see good in it for themselves. They're not doing it because they're against somebody and something. They're doing it because they are for something.
The White House has said that the project will usher in a new era of creativity. The US plans to show that it can count on its West Asian allies in efforts to contain China's rise. But is that the case? Because Gulf nations are gradually moving away from the American hegemony. China is among the biggest emerging partners. China's Belt and Road Initiative, that experts say might be a threat from IMEC, is too expansive to be tackled. China launched the massive infrastructure project in 2013 and has poured around $1 trillion into its projects so far. While the US might have its military presence, Beijing remains the highest West Asian investor. China has invested in Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and even the semi-autonomous Kurdish regions. And despite the regular hiccups along the BRI and its not-so-regular pushing the countries deeper into debt outcome, the project's footprint is only growing. In 2022, West Asian countries expanded their cooperation with China and received about 23% of Chinese BRI engagement. It was a 6.5% jump from the previous year. For Gulf powers, the new project is not about choosing sides, but pushing their agenda, that is, better connectivity to the world. Two West Asian nations part of the new corridor, UAE and Saudi Arabia, are members of the BRI. But Gulf powers believe it is time they establish their presence, have their agendas and push the unilateral order away. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
1 year ago, Iran descended into a new era, some might call chaotic. A 22-year-old Kurdish girl died in custody. Her name is Mahsa Amini. Her name is now well cemented in the history of the Islamic Republic of Iran. 1 year after that, what has changed in the Iranian society? This report tells you.
September 16, 2022. A pivotal day for Iran. A year ago, around this time, Iran's morality police arrested a 22-year-old woman, Mahsa Amini. Her offense showing too much hair beneath her compulsory veil. Soon, the news of her death came. It spread like wildfire on social media. Protests erupted at her funeral in her hometown, Saqqez. They soon spread to the rest of the country. Chants of woman, life, freedom echoed on every street. Mahsa Amini's death in custody triggered Iran's longest anti-government protests since 1979. The last time Iranis were out on the streets in this number, the monarchy was toppled. The Islamic Republic was established. This time around, exactly the opposite happened. The same republic established more than 4 decades ago proved itself too ideologically rigid to reform and too ruthless to collapse. The protests were handled in trademark Khamenei style. Dissent crushed, all concessions refused, hundreds killed and thousands put behind bars. This was in line with the Iranian establishment, especially the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei's belief that compromising under pressure is a trait of the weak. The country's President Ebrahim Raisi this week appeared on an American TV channel. It was his first interview since the protests last year. He defended the government's response to the demonstrations and warned that those who try to sow instability in the Islamic Republic world would pay a big cost. At first, morality police largely vanished from the streets after Amini's death, but they returned when the protests fizzled out. Iran in recent months installed surveillance cameras to identify and penalize unveiled women. Authorities reportedly continue to question, threaten and arrest people related to the protest. But despite it all, the society is seeing a small change. Many Iranians say the number of unveiled women continues to grow, and that has Parliament considering longer prison terms and harsher penalties. There's another side to it too. After months of unrest, Iranis adjusted to the new normal. They're managing with more curbs, more sanctions, more compromises. For many, hijab is no longer a concern. Not to get it wrong, it remains a sore point, but the economy putting food on their plates supersedes it all.
I myself have no problem with hijab, but would be happier if the economic conditions get better. I believe economic issues are much more important than the topic of hijab.
It is getting worse every day. People are having hard lives. Our authorities should first provide good economic conditions. Hijab is a completely secondary and personal issue.
The Iranian economy is in a shambles. On top of it, millions face the wrath of climate change. Iran's former Minister of the Environment warned that continued mismanagement of water resources could mean 50 million Iranians at the risk of displacement. It means that 70% of the population will have no choice but to leave the country. Climate scientists say parts of Iran can most likely be the first places on Earth to get too hot to be inhabited by humans.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, always bringing you the latest updates, news and stories from one of the world's most volatile regions. Until then, stay safe and you know where to catch all the latest global news. I'm Ghadi signing off from Lebanon. Keep on watching WION. World is One.